Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar on navigating India's coal transition, decommissioning, repurposing, and diversification, organized by the International Institute for Sustainable Development and Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta. I extend a gracious welcome to all of you for joining this webinar from various corners of the globe. I am Deepak Sharma, Policy Analyst with International Institute of Sustainable Development's Energy Program based in India. International Institute for Sustainable Development is an independent think tank having offices across the world. We have our presence in India for more than a decade. We work on issues of energy and sustainable development. We have been tracking government support to various energy technologies and support national and state governments in their effort to shift support from fossil fuels to clean energy in a just and socially responsible way. Now, coming to the webinar on navigating India's coal transition, decommissioning, repurposing, and diversification. This topic is both timely and relevant, given the role of coal in India's economy, and as coal mines and thermal power plants near the end of their life. I would like to announce a few housekeeping rules before we start with our webinar proceedings. This webinar will be recorded and will be posted on IISD's official YouTube channel. I'll share the link of the channel in the chat box. You can view it yourself as well as share it with your colleagues. You can see the comment box as well as the Q&A box on your screen. We invite and encourage you to post your comments and questions in the Q&A box, as well as the comment section. If the question is directed at a specific panelist, we would encourage you to type in the panelist name as well, while the question to whom the question is being directed. I'm now going to hand over the webinar proceedings to the moderator of the event, Dr. Mrityunjay Mohanty, professor at the Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, to start the proceedings. Thank you.
Thanks, Deepak, and welcome everybody. Hi, my name is Mrityunjay Mohanty. I teach economics at Calcutta, and this is the second in the series of the Bridge Initiative webinar series, introducing a volume, which is a volume by the Center for Development and Environmental Policy on the role of coal in a sustainable energy mix for India, a wide-angle view. The volume is edited by my colleague, co-edited by my colleague, Professor Una Sarkar, and me. And this webinar series is a way in which we introduce the volume to a wider audience, right? It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you and to welcome what is really a very stellar panel that we have. Each of these panelists over here are contributors to the volume in section 3 of the volume, each of these, and will discuss their respective contributions. If I might introduce to you the panel, there is in reverse order in which they will speak. First is Christopher Beaton. Christopher is the lead in sustainable energy development at the IISD. Vibhuti Garg is the Director South Asia of Institute for Energy, Economics and Financial Analysis. Shubham Thakre is the Energy Modeling Manager at Vasudha Foundation. Sarthak Khurana is the Manager of Climate and Policy Initiatives. And it also gives me great pleasure to mention that both the Climate Policy Initiatives and the IISD are partners in Center for Development and Environmental Policy's Bridge Initiative, out from where this particular volume is a part, right? So to not waste any further time, may I start with, oh, sorry, I forgot. To introduce to you Sucharita Bhattacharjee, sorry, my apologies, Sucharita Bhattacharjee, who's the policy analyst and deputy heads of Cuts International, of Cuts International's Calcutta Resource Center. My apologies, Sucharita, for this. And if we may begin with you, Sucharita, so if I might ask you a question which has to do with the nature of repurposing. How can India effectively address the challenges associated with decommissioning and reutilizing old thermal power plants to transition away from fossil fuels and ensure particularly both economic viability and inclusivity? This is a very serious issue given the huge investments that India has made in coal. So how do we move, as we move out of coal, how do we utilize this investment that has already been made? So Sucharita?
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. To begin with, while we, all of us understand and acknowledge the fact that while a shift to clean energy is a welcome move, or in the current context, but we should also realize that it is a matter of grave concern that there is lack of, several things like there is lack of policy, lack of legislation that can address the end-of-life management issues associated with decommissioning of a coal-based thermal power plant. In India, if you look at Indian context, most of the emphasis is given on planning, designing, construction, operation, policies related to employee welfare, etc., but not on the end-of-life management of such units. But recently, the Indian government has mandated that any thermal power plant which is more than 25 years of age, they should be shut down. They should be decommissioned, citing various issues like technical issues or environmental non-compliance or social factors, etc. So if we go by that mandate, that means there will be a number of thermal power plants which will be shut down by the year 2030. The cumulative capacity is between 50,000 to 60,000 megawatt. So we have to be very careful while devising a strategy how to decommission these thermal power plants and how to repurpose all the resources that were employed there, be it the land, be it the workforce, be it any other resource that were, or even the equipment that were in use. So to be able to develop a strategic roadmap, we first need to understand what are the basic challenges when we talk about decommissioning a thermal power plant in the Indian context. Number one, as I mentioned, there is no such law that mandates, no law or no policy that mandates that it is a compulsory thing for the authority to decommission or start thinking about repurposing a thermal power plant after it is abandoned or after it is shut down. Second is, in India, most of the thermal power plants, where are they located? Either they are located inside the coal regions or across the coastal region because they rely a lot on the imported coal. But we fail to come up with, strategy or policy framework that adopts an integrated approach. We must realize that we cannot look at the thermal power plants as isolated units, and they should be looked at as a part of the bigger or larger ecosystem, which is basically the coal value chain and also the associated or ancillary industry. Very recently, the National Green Tribunal gave a issued a directive to the Central Pollution Control Board that they have to come up with a set of guidelines which will facilitate a seamless decommissioning process of thermal power plants. But at this moment, as I speak, the set of guidelines, the draft set of guidelines that the CPCP has suggested are very generic, and there is a lot of ambiguity when we try to look at several components, like how the policies or how the set of guidelines will be addressing components like labor, land, finance, or environment associated with the decommissioning process. seldom we are able to factor in the stake of the local community or the workforce, which was earlier employed in the thermal power plant and probably is going to be rendered jobless as the transition happens. Yes, there are committees at different levels, but how do the committees work is a question we must ask ourselves. And there's also the absence of just transition policy or just transition fund. As I was mentioning in the beginning, that there is no fund or no finance earmarked for the end of life activities after a thermal power plant is closed down. So there is no earmarked fund for that. And we don't have a fund, a just transition fund that will be taking care of several aspects like the income of the community or the employer, the workforce, or the health insurance, or the pension fund, or the skill enhancement, investment, etc. So these are the challenges. Now, once we realize what are the challenges on ground, then only we can be we will be able to come up with a set of strategic suggestions for India to follow in order to embrace foolproof. Nothing is foolproof. Like the paper that me and my colleague Trinani we have written, we have cited a number of case interventions from not only from India but also across globe. But let me tell you, none of this was foolproof. We tried to look at what have been the best interventions.
Clearly, there are big challenges, Sucharita. I can see
Yes,
that we
yes.
have to navigate those. And as we go forward, I'm sure that we'll have to work out the way we'll repurpose. So thank you very much. We'll try and come back to these issues. We'll now move to Sarthak. So Sarthak, when you look at these two big behemoths, Coal India and NTPC, who are such important players in the coal value chain, what is the nature of, how do you see these firms navigating this process through which we will shift to a more renewable energy focused energy system? What are the big challenges, and what are these two firms thinking about in terms of navigating the path ahead?
Thank you. Just like Sucharita mentioned, that there is a pathway for the eventual shift in the country's energy mix. But even before that happens, these two behemoths face a lot of competition from the decline in costs of renewable energy and now renewable plus storage. And what it does is not only does it eat into their business, it takes away their dominant position that they enjoy in the current energy mix and sector. And we have seen this to a certain extent in the renewable space, where the private sector has taken a march on these giants, and they're actually leading the domain. And PSUs, in all honesty, they aren't oblivious to this. They have been thinking about this. They've actually started the process of gradually diversifying their businesses. For instance, NTPC has set up a subsidiary called NTPC REL, which already has 3.3 gigawatts of renewable capacity, has 10 more gigawatts in pipeline. CIL has a target of around 3 gigawatts by 2025-26. But when we talk of the challenges, I would say the challenges are threefold. First, these organizations are taking steps to diversify, no doubt about it. But the pace of shift that these organizations are going through may not be adequate and may not be able to keep pace with the competition. So the diversification process may need to be ramped up significantly. Secondly, these are organizations which have been in the public sector. They have grown organically over a long period of time. They have worked predominantly on cost plus regulated return business models. The competition that they face now is in a completely competitive bidding based domain where growth often comes in an inorganic fashion. So there would be a need to completely shift the organizational strategies and re-gearing of these organizations to compete. Thirdly, we very often see that there is a push for diversification only in the RE space. No doubt it's a fantastic space to diversify. incredible amount of opportunity going by how much India has the potential for and what India has in targets. But that space is rife with competition. We already have very large private sector players playing in that domain. So what the PSUs will be able to do is generate great returns for their investment, but they will not have the same dominance that they have in that domain. So possibly it might be more suitable to look beyond just RE, definitely do RE, but look beyond RE in other places where you can invest and where you can gain the same dominance and use a financial heft to gain the powerful position there. So to do this, we had written a paper, me and my colleague, CPI's work is being published there. And we have proposed a two-step process which involves qualitative and quantitative analysis. First, what it does is it looks at business segments that these players can get into. An NTPC or a CIL cannot go into manufacturing toothpaste. That is not their competency. So what are the businesses that they should get into? When we did this analysis, we saw that RE is a no-brainer that comes out definitely on top. But energy storage and electric mobility came out to be good options for NTPC. And mining of metals and production of coal gasification and downstream chemicals became very valuable for CIL. The next part looks at within each segment what can be done. This is where the actual money putting happens, and this is where more business intelligence comes in and how you phase out the investments. For instance, when we're doing this analysis for NTPC, when we looked at the generation space, RE looks great, fantastic. But within RE, offshore wind is an area where there's almost no competition. So in the near term, investment in offshore wind is a great idea. And in the slightly medium term, investment in nuclear is a fantastic idea because they're unlikely to face competition there. So this is a strategy that they can employ over a medium to long period of time, which they can utilize to eventually diversify their businesses and remain the behemoths, the giants, and the dominant players that they are in the sector.
Thank you, Sarthak, for that very, very crisp introduction to the possibilities that exist. And that allows us very clearly to introduce Shubham and to this conversation. And as Sarthak mentioned, Shubham, storage is probably one of the areas that opens up, is very important, all right, in terms of switching to renewable energy because of balancing, grid balancing issues and so on and so forth. And as Sarthak's presentation made clear, as a business opportunity. Right? So it may put to you then this following question. So how can different storage technologies be effectively applied to address grid stability challenges, which is one of the big issues as we shift to renewable and as India's share of renewables and increase their share in India's energy portfolio. So can you throw some light on this?
Right. Thank you very much for the question. So I think it is very important to look at the status quo currently. So if we look at the current mix of the energy storage technology in the power system, almost 90% of the mix is constituted by the pumped hydro storage, almost 4.5 gigawatt, of which almost 3.2 gigawatt is currently operational. But only since last 3 to 4 years that we saw the momentum of first pilot scale battery storage demonstration in Delhi and then the Pondicherry. And later on, the auctions took momentum. And back in year 2021, we saw that Greenco and Renew Power backed the awards for pumped hydro storage as well as for electrochemical technologies. But there has not been a quite momentum in terms of different kind of technologies, right, from electrochemical to mechanical and other technologies which are quite suitable for Indian conditions. This is because if we look around the electrochemical storage technologies, in lithium-ion takes most of the share in terms of electric mobility, and that is why the commodity prices are rising so much. So I think it is very important to look at grid scale storage in India and different technologies that could really come in the years. So if you look around the different grid regions in India, it is quite interesting to see that the northern region has quite of a domestic load. And what happens is because of this, there is quite a spike in the electricity demand across the day. And this really needs a lot of stability and ramping support from the power system. And if we look on the counterpart on the western region grid, which is quite dominated by industrial load and does not have much intraday variation. So different grid regions in India have different need of technologies for energy storage. So it is quite evident to look at other kind of technologies which could run from only from seconds to days. And this is why it is very important to look that by year 2030, we need quite ramp up of electrochemical storage technology because they can provide the much required ramping support and the flexibility to the grid. And later on, when we see that as India moves toward net zero targets, it is quite pertinent that we could see a longer duration of storage because what we see that as coal moves away from the system, we would be also seeing a considerable part of the base load which could be taken by energy storage. So here the role of long duration energy storage comes up from pumped hydro storage and also from various electrochemical storage because what we have seen that there is a significant improvement in energy density of low batteries, and this would be giving a quite a momentum. And if we talk in purpose of the repurposing of thermal power plants, it is quite important that we look around various thermal energy storage interventions. In the recent years, there have been many pilots going on, and also one of the organization in India, they are currently uh, starting a pilot later in this year to install thermal energy storage. So I think to going around, we would be seeing many kind of different storage technologies to serve different applications across Indian grid.
Thank you very much, Shubham, for that nice introduction to the nature of variation for regional variation that grids have and the possible solutions that we have both in the short and in the medium term. Clearly, the short term has certain requirements in terms of the life of rebalancing, and the longer term requirements are different to be addressed through different technologies. So thank you very much for that. And may I now draw into this discussion Vibhuti. Vibhuti, as we look at these transition paths, right? We, of course, have the good fortune of looking at others who have trekked this path before us, right? So in that context, this next era energy, which has a very successful attempt at decarbonization, which is a thermal power firm, which is decarbonized. So what are the sorts of lessons that Indian thermal power plants can draw from next era's successful attempt at decarbonization?
Great. Yeah. So as part of this big book that you guys are launching, which is, I mean, firstly, a huge round of applause. I mean, it's been a big effort, and I know that effort is now ready to give results. So great job on that to both IISD and IIM Calcutta. As part of that, we did analyze this next era energy as a case study and how we can draw lessons for the Indian utilities. So next, just for the audience knowledge, I mean, Next Era Energy, which owns the Florida Power and Light Company, which is the United States' largest electric utility that sells more power than any other utility, now has shifted its technologies and is now providing clean, affordable, reliable electricity through use of more and more renewable energy. So this Florida Power and Light Company, which eliminated over the years, it has completely eliminated use of foreign oil and has also shuttered all of its coal plants in Florida and is now looking at, it's already built and is further deploying more and more solar and wind capacity, and also to provide firm supply as, building up more storage capacity, again, to balance the intermittent renewable energy. So what NextEra has done, as is being shown in this graph, is they have committed that they will be building up solar and storage deployment to the extent of 90 gigawatt of solar and 50 gigawatt of battery storage by 2045. Further, company is going big on green hydrogen. Company is also investing big in transmission and distribution sector infrastructure development, which becomes again a very critical point for more and more renewable energy deployment as well. And further, it's not only on the renewable energy or the technology side, but is also going big on deploying electric vehicles and promoting energy efficiency too. The other thing which NextEra did was also to set up interim goals. So it has set decarbonization targets of 36% by 2025, 52% by 2030, 62% by 2035, 83% by 2040, and 100% by no later than 2045. So what it did was setting up its 5-year long goal. And that's what has really helped them to incrementally keep increasing the share of, its renewable energy as well as other measures as well. What resulted was that the company really led to savings of $12 billion in avoided fuel costs. It has been reducing its high emission asset portfolio by either divesting or retiring. So, and by 2021, the company has completely phased out all its coal plants. So this is something which the Indian companies can learn from. So it's more like, you are not only just looking at your conventional RE production, but looking at the backward integration. As Sarthak mentioned, most of the companies in India, including NTPC and the likes, have already started doing that. But the pace is slow. So definitely what these companies need is to set up interim goals. Also, not only look at the scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. So what NextEra did was, right now, while it committed to scope 1 and scope 2 emissions by building renewable energy, but they're also now expanding capabilities through investment in software platforms, for a better reporting of even scope 3 emission. So which looks like a little far-fetched now, but the company has already started looking at scope 3 emissions as well. Further, this would require means that huge investments are required, but the way it can be addressed is through a constructive regulatory environment, and as well as lowering operating costs that can help attract investments to grow clean energy capacity as well, and keep costs low for customers and improve reliability. So the idea is now to shift from, value-added products and services such as energy as a service model. So that's the model which can work really well for a lot of Indian companies, both public sector as well as private sector. And also looking at, the newer technologies and looking at beyond typical power purchase agreements. So we are seeing corporate PPAs playing a very big role. So these are some of the elements that can really help the organizations to diversify, to decarbonization, and not only, as I said, in their core business, but across the value chains into module, battery manufacturing, and as well as even in the downstream into the distribution business is something which we are increasingly looking that a lot of Indian organizations can look into.
Thank you very much for that, Vibhuti, for taking us through this path that NextEra has followed. And I think what emerges very clearly are two things. The first is to be a little more creative in the way we look at options, and the very important role of benchmarking, and that your interim milestones, your interim goals, and how they guide and feed back into the entire process. So that's something that certainly Indian thermal power plants should be looking at. So, and given that all of you have been so good at keeping time, it just opens up a bit of space for all of us to have a second round of questions. And actually, there's a question that's for Sucharita, which also allows us to go back. So Sucharita, the question that is specifically addressed to you is that why do we not have an integrated approach to the whole
Yeah, I
question.
already answered that in the chat box, but let me just
Yeah, so
uh,
let me just add a small, let me add a small coda to that. So in answering, can you quickly take us through an instance of successful repurposing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Which allows for, which uses an integrated approach to this, right? So
Yeah.
if you quickly can, but if not, in the next couple of minutes, if you address the first question, why it's not integrated, that's also fine. So, but if you can also give us a sense of what this a successful plan could be, that would be very useful for our viewers and listeners. Yes, over to you.
Yeah.
It's a couple of minutes.
Yeah. So basically, why there is no integrated approach, because there is primarily no legal mandate, which makes it compulsory for the thermal power plant authority to, think compulsorily about decommissioning, and then followed by repurposing, redevelopment of the same site, equipment, and other resources that were employed. In the section that we have written, we have taken reference from a number of examples from India and mostly from Europe and America. But as I was mentioning in the previous question, none of them is foolproof. We try to look at the best possible interventions that they could make. So let me just take one such example, which was of Spanish multinational electric utility company, Endesa. They are repurposing the Teruel coal power plant in Spain. The action plan presented by them had components of new renewable energy capacity along with a unique hybridization of technologies. This is to be further complemented by a foolproof socio-economic development plan, which is very crucial and is missing in the Indian context. The erstwhile fossil fuel based power production will now be replaced by renewable energy with a total installed capacity of more than 1800 megawatt. But more importantly, is there will be a huge conversion, which is expected to recover almost 90% of the materials that were left behind post decommissioning of that thermal power plant unit. Provisions for training of target stakeholders groups, which used to be the the workforce before, and also the communities living nearby. That provision is there to ensure their employment in the primary and service sectors through economic diversification. That plan was also a part of the strategy that they came up with. The plan also focused on creating alliance to employ the maximum local people possible to retain them in the local economic activities and thereby stopping the out-migration, which is a cause of concern in Indian context again, because as the coal mines are abandoned, as the thermal power plants are, their capacity is diversified towards renewable energy, there a lot of out-migration is anticipated to happen from mainly. One example is from the eastern region to western region. Coming back to the Spanish example, additional measures were taken to protect the biodiversity while ensuring inclusivity in the proposed plan, and also industry collaboration, which is another important crucial component. Industry collaboration were also explored for manufacturing solar components, developing a recycling center for wind turbine, and developing an industrial zone for allied ancillary industries. And of course, maintaining the circularity of all these industrial elements. So yes, this could be treated as one of the best possible case intervention in the global context.
Right. Thank you for that. Sucharita, what appears to be the case. There are two critical elements to this. One is the involvement of the local economy, so that we retain value in the local economy in terms of what value added and in terms of employment, and the notion of circularity. So if we can bring in the notion of circularity, which of course means that all other firms in that value chain contribute to the local economy and retain value, then it opens up new opportunities. And that's clearly what the Spanish seems to have done. Spanish unit seems to have done. So thank you for that. So let me turn to Sarthak now. Sarthak, you had laid out the possibilities open to, in the particular context, CIL and NTPC quite very clearly. Now, you know as well as I do, and we all do, that leveraging possibilities is not just the fact of the firm alone, right? The firm exists within an ecosystem which has both shareholders and stakeholders, right? Now, how do you see the government, which is perhaps the biggest shareholder and the stakeholder, and other stakeholders enabling this diversification strategy? What role can they play to do that?
So that's a very, very important and very pertinent question, because especially for PSUs, it is not the easiest to make a big shift. So the shift will have to happen at multiple levels, beginning with the business and management of these organizations themselves. They'll have to understand and accept that there is a use by date for their current business models. And when they evaluate newer business opportunities, it cannot be just financial returns. It has to look at national priorities. What are the international commitments the country has made? What are the organizational objectives and strategies? What is the technical maturity of the businesses they want to get into? What is the long-term growth potential? And eventually the overall sustainability, not just from an environmental, but also from a business perspective. The framework I mentioned earlier can help with that. Second perspective is when the capital investors come in, with the capital providers come in, which includes the equity and the debt holders. As you mentioned, government is one of the biggest equity holders in these companies. So the equity holders will have to give these companies a bit of leeway and understanding that these companies have to make bets on newer technologies, newer opportunities. And not all of the bets will materialize in the same form, in the same amount of return. Some of the bets may give fantastic returns. Some of them might be much more moderate. So it will be a bouquet of returns, which they will have to understand and accept, considering the situations these organizations are in. Then comes the debt holders. They'll have to come up with reasonable financing terms. I'll not definitely say concessional for everything, but at least concessional financing as well, because it is the availability of low cost finance which makes the biggest difference in the pace and scale of diversification of these entities. Third, and the most important perspective, is the workers and the communities that are tied to these organizations. We cannot forget that these organizations are the giants that they are because of the workers and the communities that have supported them in this journey. And a transition cannot leave them behind. It is not going to work if it leaves any of them behind. So there has to be a need, there is a need for systematic identification of impacts on who are the stakeholders and what are the impacts, identification of costs of mitigation of those impacts, development of regulatory frameworks and assessment technologies on how can these impacts be adequately mitigated in a regulated fashion, and finally development of financial solutions to throw capital at the problem. Until and unless you have the required cash to solve the problem, you'll not be able to go much further, very far with it. So this would require work from government, regulatory bodies, donor organizations, people like us in research, the organizations themselves, and the communities. For instance, Jharkhand has already started this process. They have set up a transition task force, which is a very good first step, because they start looking at the requisite policies and frameworks that are needed for a just transition. We and CPI on our part are working on a just transition financing facility where we can see how we can crowd in capital from different parts of the world, some philanthropic capital, some concessional capital, some commercial capital, and make it available for the transition to take place. There are institutions within the sector who are developing training programs, who are developing entrepreneurial programs to help reskill these individuals so that the migration that Charita mentioned does not actually have to happen, so that the eastern part of the country doesn't just start exporting labor to the other parts of the country. So that is something that will have to happen. And eventually the PSUs themselves will have to co-opt all of this into their eventual strategy formulation. When they look at a diversification, when they set up a diversification strategy, they have to factor in all of these features so that they have a strategy that is bought in by their own people, by the communities, by the government, and which delivers returns for their shareholders and lenders.
So thanks for that, Sarthak. I'll just a very quick follow-up question, which comes from the cost of finance, which you raised. Both CIL and NTPC are cash rich.
Yes.
And so availability of cash is not an issue, right? Now, however, you made another point, which is the availability of low-cost finance. Right?
Yes.
When you say availability of low-cost finance, what you're saying is that the cost of finance that NTPC and CIL need to work with is lower than what is the cost of the cash reserves. Is that what you're saying? Because if it is not, there's go on.
So if you look at the cash, it is most of the cash typically in PSUs is distributed as dividends to the shareholders. Before it comes into the balance sheet, it gets distributed dividends. They are cash rich, but for every new business approval that they need, they have to go to the shareholders and the biggest shareholder, that is the government. So the way the cash is used is also monitored, limited, and controlled. The biggest problem here is that because this is a regulated entity that has been living in a regulated structure, the returns from newer businesses may not always be as certain, and investing in newer technologies may be much more risky. So the return expected in those technologies might be higher. So to mitigate those challenges, availability of lower cost capital from the lenders or from other philanthropic institutions can help bring down the overall cost of capital. Use of innovative instruments such as blended finance, financing facilities, maybe even specialized bonds can help bring down the cost of capital, which can be then used for specific purposes vis-a-vis the diversification.
Thanks for that, Sarthak. So, Shubham, if I may now turn to you. There are a couple of questions, but first let me ask this question to Shubham, and we'll come back to the questions in a moment. You mentioned two storage options, right? One in the short term and one in the longer term, right? Now, if you were to elaborate a little on that, so what are the sorts of trade-offs that we see if we were to follow the short-term alone or the long-term alone? I mean, clearly we need a mix of both, right? That's what you're saying, that we need to go into the short-term to do it now, but doing it in that short-term storage alone doesn't solve the issue. You need the longer-term storage. So this is what you're saying, right? So can you elaborate a little on that, and what's the nature of trade-offs that emerge?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that question. So first of all, I think we need to understand the spectrum of this issue, where both long-term and short-term solutions come in. So I think if we look at the status quo, what are the current applications that the current technologies are serving? So let us look at the kind of technologies that are serving the purpose of flexibility as well as the ramping capability. Those are mostly served by coal power plants, as well as the peak adequacy, as well as the energy is also served by coal. So, but as we go beyond to 2030, we would be seeing not that much amount of renewable that we be completely substituting by battery storage. But here we see that the role of resource adequacy is still there, but we need a short-term solutions which are spanning across the day. So this is why the role of storage for a shorter duration is quite pertinent in the shorter term, that is till 2030. So even in our modeling studies, we have seen that when we see the results across 2030 to 2050, most of these solutions so that the capacity that we require is only up to 2 or 3 hours maximum. But when we look across year 2050, a lot of that capacity is based on a longer duration storage. So what exactly happens is as coal phases out of the system, a larger portion of the base load which was used to be supported by coal has to be now substituted by other options. And since the cost optimality of other alternative solutions come up, this base load has also been able to taken care of by longer duration storage. So what we are seeing is that both kind of a shorter intermittency and also a kind of a longer duration storage is best for beyond 2040 or so. And for shorter term till 2030, we see solutions that are maybe for intraday flexibility or to meet the frequency regulation in the system.
Right. Just let me take that forward a little. Now, one of the things that has been interesting about the way technology has emerged and evolved is the rate at which the cost per unit of generating renewable power has dropped. Right?
Right.
Now, as that drops further and faster, which is what the anticipation is, does that make the baseload problem any easier to handle? It's clearly the intraday and the baseload are two very different problems. You'll always need intraday balancing. Now the baseload issue is a different issue, right? Now, does that get addressed somewhere? The ability to deal with the baseload problem, does that is it influenced by the falling cost of generating renewable power?
Definitely. So I think if we look around to year 2030, we see a lot of capacity that is still being met by the coal capacity, but we see that also almost 60 gigawatt of the capacity that is bound for economic lifetime exhaustion. So this means that beyond 2030, we see a lot of that capacity being exhausted from the system. And what happens is that when there is not enough capacity to meet that kind of a base load, we see a cost optimality solution as more preference. So currently, since most of this electrochemical technologies are not cost optimal because they have been uptaken by not being taken by stationary applications. So they are mostly used in electric mobility, and still it is not currently viable. But as we look around alternative technologies that would be more viable in the longer run, that is only beyond 2030. So which are currently not really cost optimal. So one of the solution here is thermal energy storage or hydrogen storage. We can't really support long duration storage in current terms, but it is quite obvious that beyond 2040 we could see some uptake of this for a longer duration of storage.
So thanks for that, Shubham. I'll bring Vibhuti into this conversation and then address a bunch of questions that have, we'll take up a bunch of questions that have come up. So Vibhuti, just Shubham mentioning of hydrogen and what role hydrogen can play in renewable resources. So may I put to you then, if hydrogen has to emerge as a viable solution to the production of renewable energy, is there a particular role that public sector enterprises and collaborations between private enterprise and public sector enterprise, or between public sector enterprises themselves, can play in generating or developing this new technology, which is an important role to play in the future, particularly in terms of balancing and so on.
Right. So India has made commitment to produce at least 5 million metric tons of green hydrogen annually by 2030, which means that we would need about 125 gigawatt of renewable energy to produce that. If we are talking about green hydrogen. And in turn, what it also means is that this whole development of the green hydrogen ecosystem, including electrolyzers, including setting up of RE, including transmission infrastructure, this will be very, very highly capital intensive. So conventional debt will not be available to fund these forays because it's still something which is being tested upon. We are seeing a lot of pilots being carried out and not like full-fledged projects coming up yet, because we are still trying to understand where the economies of scale or where in which part of geographies we can get the maximum returns with that kind of an investment. So given that fact, a large part of the capital will have to come to begin with from promoters' balance sheet. So big players can support that to some extent. But on the other hand, we would need companies to, the right approach would be to diversify across the green hydrogen value chain, which carries many risks at this point of time and requires huge capital. Hence, collaborations become very necessary to successfully develop green hydrogen or even green ammonia in India and even elsewhere. So if you will see, collaboration, can really facilitate or bring about these companies continuing with their primary business, but at the same time decarbonize and shift towards clean energy. These partnerships can take various forms and sizes, whether it's in the form of joint ventures, whether it's in the form of creation of special purpose vehicles. There are different ways where, which collaboration can happen. We are seeing this kind of collaboration already happening with the Indian OMCs. So for example, IOC, the Indian Oil Corporation as a company, has been collaborating with various organizations for development of green hydrogen. The company signed a pact in February 2021 with Greenstat, Norway, to set up a center of excellence on hydrogen. And the center will actually facilitate the transfer and sharing of technology, know-how, and experience through the green hydrogen value chain and other relevant technology. In 2022, last year, July, IOC and NTPC also signed an agreement to form a JV company, and where the NTPC is responsible for providing round-the-clock renewable energy power to the tune of 650 megawatt by December 2024. IOC in turn, not only it was tying up or setting up Center of Excellence, but it also tied up with, L&T and Renew Power. A tripartite agreement was signed between the three players, wherein the strong credentials of L&T in designing, executing, and delivering EPC projects will be used. IOC's expertise in petroleum refining along with other energy spectrum process will be used, and Renew Power will largely provide you the round-the-clock renewable energy power. So these are the kind of collaborations that has already started happening in this green hydrogen space, and these become very, very critical, as I said, in technologies which are very capital intensive to begin with. It will lead to more efficiency, and it will lead to cost optimization, achieving, the climate goals. So yeah, these are some of the models which not only PSUs, but we are increasingly seeing even the private players are looking at, and not unlike where I was initially talking about diversification, the same company looking into backward integration and looking into forward integration. But there are technologies, depending upon the maturity of technologies, depending upon the cost of technology. I think there are different strategies one needs to adopt. And in green hydrogen, clearly we see more collaboration can play a better role in pushing large-scale deployment rather than the same company looking at all the spectrum of the value chain.
Right. Thanks, Vibhuti, for that. It's really fascinating as to how different PSUs are trying different things. But what's also very clear, and what's come through in the course of this webinar, is that yes, it's true that PSUs face the brunt of climate change, but the same PSUs are also positioned to lead on issues of related to climate change and renewables. So that's quite fascinating as to who's able to do what and so on. So we'll now switch to a bunch of questions that have come up, and thank you everybody for asking questions and so there's one particular question and for Sucharita, which I will now address to her. And this is to do with how the workforce gets restructured and reordered and so on and so forth. Well, clearly the idea is that, you get local economies, circular economies, et cetera, going. And the big emphasis is on retaining labor within the region or nearabouts, right? So you don't face a huge issue of migration. But the question that has come about, even in this new world, right, where you think of this, what is the scale of available options into which people can switch? Is it enough to absorb labor that will be made free as a result of closing? Will repurposing be able to handle that? That's the question that's come. If you can spend a couple of minutes addressing it.
Yes. So the question also asks about the formal and informal workers. What
Right.
happens to the informally employed workers, the contractual workers? Yeah. So generally, the examples that we see mostly the formal employees, when the transition happens, when the thermal power plants are shut down, etc., the formal employees, the authority tries to relocate them to the other operational thermal power plants or any other businesses under the same flagship organization. But yes, there is no social security scheme or any particular measure that is there for the informally employed section of workers, that is the contractual workers. Now, as and when we try to facilitate transition, couple of things that we must keep in mind. One is the continuous engagement with the workforce, both formal and informal, especially informal workforce, and the local community, to understand that what are the challenges that they are going to face, what has been their stake in the entire transition debate. And this should happen on a regular basis through proactive role of trade unions. Now, the role of trade unions in India is not similar as that in the developed countries like Germany. And that needs to be replicated, and that gap needs to be breached. The trade unions need to be more vocal about the rights and stakes of the informally employed section of workers. Yes, in India, the social security scheme is either non-existing or is very weak. This is why we often talk a lot about keeping an earmarked transition fund, as in when the transition happens, this fund is to be utilized to ensure social security for a significant section of the workforce who will be rendered jobless, at least for some time. We are talking about reviving the local economy. So of course, this needs to happen in consultation with the local community and the workforce to understand the local economy first, and what are the labor intensive verticals of the economy, or what are the areas where we can create or regenerate new employment opportunities so that we can stop the outmigration from that particular region. To ensure that, two things are needed. One is the skill enhancement, to scale up, a lot of attention to be paid in skilling, upskilling, or reskilling the workforce and the local community. And second one is the industry collaboration. Industry collaboration can play a crucial role in creating new employment opportunities where the workforce which has been rendered jobless can be reabsorbed. Now, again, there are a couple of things. One is, yes, a lot of interventions are being taken under the CSR, the CSR concept, where mostly the large organizations, the PSUs, are doing a lot, keeping in mind the fate of the local community or the workforce. as and when we facilitate the transition. And second thing is with the ESG framework being more and more popular with time, and the companies have to take it very seriously in order to secure continuous finance flow, so that the investors are also willing to invest in their company. A lot of emphasis is being given in ESG, and we are really hopeful that this will play a crucial role when we look at re-employing the workforce, both formal, especially informal or contractual labors, as and when the transition happens, as and when the decommissioning of a thermal power plant or abandoning a coal mine happens. Yes.
Thank you, Sucharita. I have a very small follow-up question, and if you can answer that very briefly. This thing about money keeps coming up, this fund, right, to aid with this process of repurposing and so on and so forth, right? Now, as we stand today, there is, at least I'm not aware of, any government initiative, right, which is talking about creating this fund, let alone financing it, right? So if that fund is critical to jumpstart this process, so what is the kind of intervention that might be necessary, which will facilitate or the government to create this fund? I mean, at the end, governments respond to pressures of various kinds. And if this fund is critical to this working out, how do we go about getting that fund? Can you respond to that quickly?
Yes. So again, I will go back to my first question, that there should be a legal mandate by the government to the companies, to the thermal power plants authorities to earmark transition fund even when they are starting at the inception period of thermal power plants or a unit, there should be a proper decommissioning plan right from the beginning.
Okay, all right. So what you're saying is that if we put in place a legal mandate, it will facilitate various things happening in the process of repurposing. Is that what you're saying?
It will help the process, yes.
Okay, all right. Okay, thanks much. So I want to come to another question that has been raised by one of the panelists, which is to all of you, and you can decide to take it in turn, and we can go in the reverse order. We can go in the reverse order of the way the presentation took place, but it's a very important issue, which is this of land use change, right? What in the literature is called an LUC. Now, whatever you want to do in terms of alternative paths, in terms of going forward, implies change in land use. All right? Now, there is the change in land use plays a very critical role in the generation of emissions. So as we look at lowering the per unit emission cost of production, which is what you need to do if you want to decarbonize, what role does land use change play? And how can we bring it actively into the process of decarbonization? Otherwise, if we shift from one land use pattern to another land use pattern, which generates the same level of emissions, we're back to square one, right? Vibhuti, would you want to take a crack at this changing land use pattern issue?
Sure. So definitely, deployment of such large-scale renewable energy to the extent of 450 gigawatt by 2030 and much larger scale to meet your net zero goals would require huge land requirement to be used, to be built for renewable energy. But at the same time, you have to consider, when we are looking at the policy approaches, definitely decentralized renewable energy, whether it's solar rooftop or whether it's agriculture I mean, not only looking at solar pumps, but more in terms of using agricultural land for building up solar deployment, or looking at, now we are also having these buildings which can be constructed in a way, that can generate solar on its own. So, which is called the BIPV model. So there are many things which needs to be considered when you are looking at how you meet your climate goals, but at the same time deploy these renewable energy technologies. And not necessarily this has to be met through your large scale utility scale projects, but increasingly the decentralized renewable energy can play a big role. And now there are technology, there are where without impacting your crop production, you can set up large renewable energy farms at the agricultural land without, it will also save you from water efficiency. It will also give you renewable energy power, but also at the same time won't impact your crop production or productivity for that matter. So I think all these things are being explored. But just to highlight, one of my colleagues, Charles Warringham, did this analysis. Say, for example, if you are looking at decarbonization in the transport sector, so if the government of India has put a big emphasis on ethanol mixing with petrol, and large amount of land, if you will start converting into sugarcane production or maize production, which are again water intensive, that can, but the same decarbonization goals can be met through EVs with much less use of land for renewable energy deployment. So I think you really need to understand the trade-off in terms of what different pathways you are adopting. So renewable energy is not necessarily the bad way of achieving your decarbonization goals in the transport sector. If you are looking at other alternate technologies like ethanol production, unless you don't want to continue using, burning petrol or diesel for that matter, which is highly carbon intensive. So I think there are different approaches in the short to the medium to the long term, which can be exercised and without compromising on the land use based carbon emissions, and with deploying more and more renewable energy. As I said, not only looking at the utility scale, but also at the decentralized renewable energy can really address this issue.
Thanks
Also,
for that, Vibhuti.
also, may I add on to that?
Yeah.
DRE definitely is we had a target of doing 40 to 50 gigawatts of decentralized renewables by 2022. We are hardly at 8. So that is an untapped potential. Also, there are opportunities where you don't necessarily impact land use. Your offshore wind is a huge potential opportunity where you're not changing the land use. We should not completely rule out nuclear, because small modular reactors can be safe and can offer large generation potential without changing the way land use is looked at. So these are a couple of more options that can be looked at when trying to solve the land use problem.
Right. Can I just put to all of you this following thing? Right. So you have large scale on the one hand, you have DRE on the other hand, and you've got technologies which you use much less land than, say, solar on the other. Now, suppose I were to bring this land use issue directly into devising transition paths. See, currently, one of the problems is the transition paths don't directly address this issue, right? Suppose I said that my land use pattern has to improve or stay stable. How do I bring that land use pattern issue directly into thinking about transition paths, which makes this trade-offs between DRE and large scale into other technologies more concrete? So once it's concrete, addressing them becomes, which policy will go where becomes a little easier. So would any one of you want to address this? Sarthak?
Yeah. So this is very pertinent, because we cannot solve a problem on one side and create another one on the other. So an integrated approach in defining a national transition pathway, we do not have one as of now. where we clearly define what is our end goal. We know the end goal of 2070 net zero, but what is the road that we are going to take to get there? What are the technologies that we are going to deploy? What is the emission reduction trajectory that we're going to follow? What are the land use changes that we'll need to undertake? What are the uh, business model and financing structure changes that we'll have to incorporate into our thinking? Needs to be done a holistic, more wide-ranging, high-level understanding on what needs to happen at a national level has to be done. That is still a piece that is missing in this puzzle. Until and unless we have a 30,000 feet view of what transition looks like across sectors. Right now, we are doing it for the power sector, for the transportation sector, for the industrial sector, but all of this needs to come together, tie in, talk to each other, and after that, we'll have a holistic solution to this transition problem.
Thanks, Sarthak, for that. Shubham, do you have anything to say on this matter or on land use?
Mrityunjay, nothing from me.
Okay, thank you very, very much. Now there is another issue which is related to, this push towards renewables and its resource intensity, right? And Vibhuti raised the point that if you're looking at choosing between ethanol and battery technology, actually it's a no-brainer, right? See, both might have issues, but clearly battery technology dominates ethanol for a whole variety of reasons, right? Now, even as we accept that there are no perfect solutions, that each of these solutions will have issues which we must recognize and build. Resource intensity is a big thing. So, lithium extraction. Lithium extraction uses water extensively, right? How do we factor that in? One of my favorite examples about how we misfire when we're talking about sustainability, this and that, is actually RO technology, right? So to get 1 liter of water, you would throw out 3 liters of water or 2 liters of water, something like that to that extent. So I'm not against RO. That's fine. People want to like RO that, but in the net, it's a problem, right? So what is it that we can do, given that lithium currently allows us possibilities in terms of transportation, which addresses these sorts of issues, which are very important in the wider context of resource use, particularly water, which again, we are highlighting as water becoming a very critical issue in the next 20, 30 years in terms of access. So, Vibhuti, if I might start with you.
Definitely, these solutions are water intensive. So that's the reason I think we need to go beyond lithium. And that's where a lot of other technologies are being in the testing phase. They are not yet established. Lithium is much more established for that matter. And that's why there's huge reliance on lithium attraction for meeting your battery storage needs. But at the same time, I think what in the next few years, we might see other technologies like sodium technology or flow technology. I mean, unless we were talking about the integrated resource planning, unless we identify how much storage do we need for, 2 hours, 4 hours versus long-term duration, storage, whether that can be met through pumped hydro. I think the first critical element is to understand that and then start building these technologies, because your lithium battery storage may not be the solution if you really need storage for 4 to 8 hours. So I think that's the first level of assessment. But on the more technical side, I leave it to Shubham to respond, who might have done much more details. But at a strategy level, I think we need to explore many other technologies apart from just looking at lithium. Lithium, as I said, is well established. You'll get financing much more easily because the technology is established. But for other firms, like Reliance has bought a company which is looking at sodium technology for battery storage. So I think we need to move beyond, because sodium is widely available and it may not have that kind of an implication on water usage the way lithium does. But it has its own cons as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Vibhuti, for that. Shubham, would you like to come in and address this issue of resource use intensity?
Yeah, definitely. So I completely agree with Vibhuti that this is a very important issue of resource intensity of various materials. So currently what we are seeing, that I already mentioned about the use of lithium in applications which are used for electric mobility. So it has taken so much uptake that the cost of commodity itself has risen, not only because of demand, but also because of supply chain disruptions that is happening since the past couple of years. So what here we need to understand, for stationary applications, we really need to go beyond lithium, and there are many mature technologies that really are not currently in the ambit of either the policy or in the current focus and that is currently going on. So one of the technologies that really is not under focus is flow batteries, because it also has a very high energy density, and it is also environment friendly because the electrolytes and materials that is the zinc bromide and vanadium, which are not that harmful and toxic as much as lithium is. And also going forward, as we are also talking about repurposing of thermal power plants, it is very important to see as that the role of thermal energy storage is quite important, where you can replace the existing coal-fired boiler and you can replace it with various compact, various kind of radiative thermal unit where you can store energy in form of thermal energy and provide superheated steam. And we are also seeing gaining momentum at the end of this year, where there will be a pilot between the E2S power and one of the Indian utility. So I think these things are definitely coming, and I think alternative technologies will gain up as soon as we see that the PLI on grid scale storage comes up. So that will create new avenues for alternative technologies to come up, and not just focusing on the electrochemical storage.
Thanks, Shubham, and we've had a really fascinating discussion, which has put out both the nature of the challenge and the nature of the opportunity, right? And to use a phrase that Sarthak used, you need a view at 30,000 feet, right? You don't have a view on 30,000 feet. You're not going to go take this, because we currently have a very silo approach, and that creates a whole set of issues. You also need the exact reverse of the 30,000, which is a very ground level. Now, the ground level view is where repurposing gets located in the local economy. Now, it's this 30,000 view and the local economy view, matching them in terms of technologies, in terms of financing, in terms of opportunities, in terms of firms, in terms of circularity, which will define any. So thank you all for a wonderful discussion. And I now invite good friend Chris Beaton. I don't envy Chris the task to try and summarize this. I'm very glad I was the moderator and not having to sum it up. But I'm sure Chris will do a wonderful job, as he always does. Chris, over to you.
Thank you very much, Brinjoy. And I was wondering, should I be thanking today's panelists because you haven't given me an easy job? So I think today's discussions have been incredibly rich. It's been fantastic listening in. I've been taking notes furiously. So I'm going to do my best to try to draw together some threads from today's discussion as clothing thoughts. But please forgive me if I don't do justice to all of your excellent interventions. I have heroically tried to draw together all of our discussions into what I think are three main beats from today. So first is, I think we heard about challenges, and I think it's actually a credit to the quality of the discussion today that we didn't dwell for too long on those challenges, but it's a good place to start. And I think in particular, some of the first interventions we heard from Sucharita here are just very important in setting our context, right? So we have a recent mandate to shut down coal power plants that are older than 25 years, though with thanks to one of our participants for flagging that there is breathing room until 2030 before this kicks in, but still, this implies a very large amount of capacity for which we need to have plans. And Sucharita noted that the big challenge is, we don't see the policy framework, so we'd really like to see to articulate how this should be done. And in particular, this is important for people. So, what does this mean for jobs? What does this mean for local communities? And are we ready to introduce this change in a socially responsible way? So that was our first idea, number one, challenges. From there, we went to possibilities and opportunities. And I think that's where a lot of today's discussion was focused. And there was a huge amount in here. So I think we heard from Sartek on kind of firms. So, PSUs in kind of India's energy ecosystem are potentially looking at kind of big opportunities. We've seen a lot of private sector players moving into the clean energy kind of market in quite an aggressive way. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for big PSUs like CIL, NTPC, to think about how they can also seek to kind of compete and diversify their businesses and deliver a share of India's clean energy targets. These organizations will be doing something very new for them. So it's not necessarily business as usual, but as well as being a challenge, that's also an opportunity. So there's kind of a lot of interesting ways that they can seek to alter the way they think about their businesses to go forward. Also under opportunities, I think we heard a lot about technologies. So if we're kind of thinking about, specific technologies, which could be good bets for public firms looking to help deliver part of our kind of efforts to shift and repurpose kind of coal power that is being decommissioned. We heard a lot about storage. So Shivam kind of gave us a fantastic overview of a lot of the kind of coming opportunities in the storage sector, particularly flagging that we've got a lot of big differences by region. So this isn't necessarily going to look the same in all different parts of India. And also that it's not necessarily going to look the same depending on their timescale. So our kind of short-term opportunities for storage are different from our medium to long-term ones. But the medium to long-term ones just see it becoming a more and more important technology. So as a kind of a place for firms to be thinking about for diversification, it's very promising. We heard from Vibhuti about green hydrogen, and similarly, the extent to which there is a huge amount of potential for firms who are interested in delivering some of India's big green hydrogen ambitions, like 5 million metric tons of production annually by 2030. So also in opportunities, we heard a lot about strategies from different folks. So Sartek talked about kind of some of the things that, are thematic areas that need to move forward to see progress. Management was one of our strategies that came up. So kind of what are what's the role for management figures and leaders in kind of public firms who are operating a lot of today's coal power to think about their firm's objectives, their long-term growth potential, and also their role in helping to deliver a share of national priorities. We heard a lot about money. from both Sartek and Vibhuti. So basically, do we have the money, and do the firms have the money that they need to do what they need to do? Even when they're cash rich, we still have got concerns that we need to see the people who are the capital providers, the debt holders, adjusting their expectations to be sure that some of these risky bets that are being taken, which need to be taken, are being kind of treated in the right way, so money can move where it needs to go. We heard a lot again about people. So this is coming back to Mitten Joy's kind of ground level. If we don't have a strategy on the people side, don't have plans for workers and communities, then we've got a problem. And none of this will work if we're leaving people behind who kind of these businesses are built on. Sucharita elaborated on this in a lot more detail, emphasizing in particular, all of these people plans involve the need for continuous engagement. We need to earmark transition funds, possibilities for PSUs to harness CSR, and also to think about the growing momentum on ESG frameworks and how all of this can kind of enable change, as well as legal mandates for companies to earmark funds for some of their social responsibilities when decommissioning comes along. Also in strategies, Vibhuti emphasized partnerships. So partnerships are incredibly important. The extent to which firms can partner with each other and kind of share risk with some of these kind of exploratory business areas will really contribute towards their success. And partnerships can be joint ventures, special purpose vehicles, and other models. And then lastly, we heard from Sartek on vision. So in terms of strategies, we need this 30,000 feet view of what we need to see. And this is at the heart of some of the questions that we kind of were discussing towards the end when we were asking, okay, what are impacts on land use change? What about water intensiveness of different technologies? So, where is our joined up national plan that some of our more micro level thinking is fitting into? So that was a lot on our opportunities and our possibilities. But the last theme that I heard a lot about today, which is a good point to end on, was on inspiration. So I think we also just heard a lot of examples of actually this happening in practice already. And I kind of think an example, it's a bit like a picture, it speaks 1,000 words. Seeing somebody doing something already is also really helpful when we have these abstract discussions. So we heard a lot about green shoots happening in India. Sartek talked about Jharkhand's Just Transition Task Force, CPI's work to crowdsource philanthropic capital to support transitions and kind of bring some of the funds that are required to support people and support firms. Vibhuti gave us fantastic explanations of IOCL's work and collaborations on green hydrogen with Norway, working with NTPC on round-the-clock RE power, and also tying up with LNTL and Renew Power. We also had a lot of really inspirational global best practice from New Era in the US, which has kind of radically redefined its business model and really is kind of walking the talk on diversifying into a whole range of new areas, whilst also thinking in quite interesting ways about all of its different emissions, to Sucharita's example of Endesa in Spain as an example of a kind of a people action plan that looks extremely comprehensive and takes very seriously the socioeconomic development impacts of kind of shifting their business and kind of repurposing coal power. So that's it for inspiration. That's my attempt to draw together all of these threads from today. I hope that's a useful overview. And again, apologies for what I may have missed. I think that it's also my job to just extend thanks to everybody for today's webinar. So, I mean, again, huge thanks to our panelists, Charita, Sartek, Shivam, Vibhuti. I think it's been a fantastic discussion. Huge thanks, as always, to our friends and partners at IMC, and in particular, of course, Mitten Joy for your excellent moderation today. I have to also thank my colleague Deepak Sharma, who's done a lot of the magic behind the scenes and helped make sure that everything worked and everyone connected, and we're all prepared for today's discussions. And of course, everybody who joined today's webinar, thank you very much for staying with us to the end. We really appreciate it. Also, one last reminder, look out for this forthcoming publication. So you heard about the start, it's the role of coal in a sustainable energy mix for India, a wide angle view. And we anticipate it's going to be available in late August. So we've got one more webinar coming up in this series to kind of pick up on talking points and content from the publication. And we look forward to sharing a copy of the volume with you as well. So those are my thanks. Over to you, Mitten Joy, if there's anything I may have missed.
No, no. As always, you did a super job, Chris, of bringing a very complex discussion together. And thank you for that. And thank you for everybody who joined and stayed with us right to the end. And to all of you panelists, thank you very much. I certainly enjoyed my time. And thank you, Deepak, for bringing this all together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.